The old man will pay for everything until he goes to the nursing home. My son-in-law mocked, and my daughter laughed. I stayed silent. The next day, my daughter panicked. "Dad, I'm embarrassed at the store. You didn't pay my credit card bill?" My answer made him freeze. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is George, and I'm 59 years old. Until last Sunday, I believed I still had a family that respected me. I was wrong. The dining room felt smaller than usual that evening, though nothing had changed about the mahogany table Margaret had picked out 23 years ago. The same cream-colored walls, the same family photos lining the mantelpiece, the same china cabinet filled with dishes we only used for special occasions. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted, and I was just beginning to understand what. Sarah arrived with Mark around 6, as they did every Sunday since Margaret passed 2 years ago. My daughter looked tired, stressed in a way that made the lines around her eyes more pronounced. Mark, my son-in-law of 8 years, walked in with that casual confidence he always carried, like he owned whatever space he entered. They both greeted me with the kind of obligatory warmth you reserve for distant relatives you see at weddings. "How was your week, Dad?" Sarah asked, settling into her usual chair while Mark headed straight for the kitchen to grab himself a beer without asking. "Same as always," I replied, serving the pot roast I'd spent the afternoon preparing. Cooking had become one of the few things that kept me busy since retirement. Mrs. Henderson next door mentioned her grandson got into college. Full scholarship. Mark returned with his beer and a smirk. Must be nice to have a kid who actually makes something of himself. The comment hit differently than his usual jabs. There was something sharper in his tone, more deliberate. Sarah glanced at him with what looked like approval, not the embarrassment I'd grown accustomed to when he crossed lines. "Mark," I said carefully, "Tommy's doing well in community college. He's working hard." Tommy was Sarah's son from her first marriage, now 19 and living with his father across town. He'd always been a good kid, respectful, the kind of grandson who called on birthdays and remembered to say thank you. Mark had never shown him much interest, which I'd always attributed to the typical step-parent dynamic. "Community college," Mark repeated, taking a long drink. "Right. Well, we all have different definitions of success, I guess." Sarah cut into her meat with more force than necessary. "Dad, we actually wanted to talk to you about something tonight." My stomach tightened. In my experience, family conversations that started with, "we wanted to talk," never ended well. I set down my fork and waited. "It's about the house," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "This place is getting too big for you. All these stairs, the maintenance, the yard work. It's a lot for someone your age." "I manage fine," I said, though my knees had been aching more lately, and the roof did need some attention I'd been putting off. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a problem to be solved. "George, let's be realistic here. You're not getting any younger. My uncle went through this same thing with my grandfather. Stubborn old guy, wouldn't admit he needed help until he fell down the stairs and broke his hip." The word old hung in the air like smoke. I was 59, not exactly ancient, but I could see how they might view someone their father's age as past his prime. Margaret had always said I looked younger than my years, but Margaret wasn't here to offer that comfort anymore. "I haven't fallen," I said quietly. "Yet," Mark added. "Look, there are some really nice places now. Not like the nursing homes you're probably thinking of. These are communities with activities and people your own age. You'd probably be happier." Sarah nodded enthusiastically, as if Mark had just solved a complex equation. "There's this place about 20 minutes from our house, Sunset Manor. They have a golf course, a dining hall, organized trips. You'd love it." I'd heard of Sunset Manor. It was the kind of place where families put relatives they didn't want to deal with anymore. Clean, efficient, expensive enough to ease guilty consciences, but ultimately a warehouse for people whose children had moved on with their lives. "I'm not ready for that," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mark's expression shifted, patience giving way to irritation. "When will you be ready, George? When you're 90 and can't wipe yourself? We're trying to plan ahead here. Be responsible." "Responsible for what?" "For you," Sarah said, as if it should be obvious. "Dad, Mark and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you made this transition while you can still adjust properly." Better for everyone. The phrase settled in my chest like a stone. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing Sarah's face. This was the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who cried when I taught her to ride a bike because she didn't want to let go of my hand. Now she was discussing my future, like I was a piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. "I built this house for your mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We plan to grow old here together." Mark rolled his eyes. "Yeah, well, Margaret's not here anymore, is she? Time to face reality." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Sarah didn't even flinch. If anything, she looked relieved that Mark had said what she couldn't. I excused myself to get dessert from the kitchen, mainly because I needed a moment to compose myself. Standing at the counter, cutting into the apple pie I'd made that morning, I could hear them talking in low voices. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. Stubborn as hell. Not going to be easy. Sooner we deal with this. When I returned with the pie, they were sitting closer together, presenting a united front. The message was clear. They'd made their decision, and my input was merely a formality. "This pie looks delicious, Dad," Sarah said with forced brightness. "You really shouldn't go to so much trouble for us." "It's no trouble," I replied automatically, though the words felt hollow. Mark took a large bite and grinned. "Hey, maybe they'll let you bake at Sunset Manor. I bet the old folks there would love this." They laughed together, and I felt something inside me break. Not dramatically, not with any great revelation, but quietly, like a thread finally snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. I finished my pie in silence while they discussed their upcoming vacation to Bermuda, a trip they'd booked using the credit card connected to my account. They talked about Mark's promotion at the insurance company, about Sarah's plans to redecorate their living room, about everything except the man sitting 3 feet away, who had just been told his life was no longer his own to live. When they left that night, Sarah hugged me the same way she always did, quick and distracted. Mark shook my hand with his usual firm grip and said, "Think about what we discussed, George. We just want what's best for you." I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away in the BMW I'd helped them finance, leaving me alone in the house that was apparently too big for me, surrounded by memories they considered obsolete. That night I sat in Margaret's favorite chair and stared at the family photos on the mantelpiece. There was Sarah's high school graduation, her first wedding, Tommy as a baby, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, all the moments that had defined our family. In every picture, I was there, the constant presence, the provider, the foundation they'd built their lives on. Now I was just an inconvenience to be managed. But as I sat there in the darkness, something unexpected began to stir in my chest. Not despair, though that was there too. Something harder, more determined. They thought I was just a tired old man who could be shuffled off to die quietly while they enjoyed the fruits of my lifetime of work. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The week following that Sunday dinner passed differently than any week since Margaret's death. Where I'd previously filled my days with routine maintenance, reading, and the occasional visit to the hardware store, I now found myself observing, really observing. I started paying attention to things I'd unconsciously ignored for months. The credit card statements that arrived in my name but were opened by Sarah during her visits. The way Mark always seemed to know exactly how much was in my checking account. The casual way they discussed expensive purchases, as if my money was a family resource rather than my personal savings. Tuesday morning I drove to the bank for the first time in over a year. I'd always trusted Sarah to handle the finances since Margaret passed, grateful for one less responsibility during those dark months of grief. Now I was beginning to understand the cost of that trust. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, Janet, greeted me warmly. "It's been so long. How are you holding up? How are you?" "I'm doing better," I said, which felt true for the first time in months. "I'd like to review my accounts if you don't mind. All of them." Janet's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Just want to understand where I stand financially. You know how it is when you let someone else handle things for too long." She nodded sympathetically and led me to her office. What she showed me over the next hour made my hands shake with something between rage and disbelief. Sarah had been given power of attorney over my finances 6 months after Margaret's funeral, when I was still deep in grief and barely functional. I remembered signing the papers, though I'd been too numb to read them carefully. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. Sarah was my daughter, she worked in accounting, and I was struggling to manage basic daily tasks, let alone complex financial decisions. The statements revealed a pattern I'd been too trusting to see. Regular transfers from my savings to Sarah's account, always for reasonable-sounding purposes. Home repairs that I now realized had been done to her house, not mine. Medical expenses that seemed oddly frequent given that I rarely saw doctors. Credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, stores I'd never shopped at, for amounts that made my stomach turn. Mrs. Patterson explained that you were having some memory issues, Janet said carefully, referring to Sarah by her married name. She said the doctor recommended she handle your finances to prevent any confusion. Memory issues. I'd never had memory issues. I'd been depressed, certainly, struggling with the profound loneliness that comes after losing a spouse of 34 years, but my mind had always been sharp. Did I ever speak to you directly about these arrangements? I asked. Janet shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, but your daughter provided all the necessary documentation. And given the circumstances— What circumstances? Your age, your recent loss, the doctor's recommendation. She trailed off, clearly realizing she'd said something wrong. What doctor? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. There had been no doctor's recommendation. Sarah had simply told the bank what they needed to hear to gain control of my money, and they'd accepted her word because it fit their assumptions about grieving widowers in their late 50s. I left the bank with copies of every statement from the past 2 years and a new understanding of just how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. The numbers were staggering. Over $40,000 had been transferred from my accounts to pay for their lifestyle. The BMW, the vacation to Europe last spring, the kitchen renovation they'd done to their house, even Mark's expensive golf club membership, all funded by my retirement savings. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with the statements spread out like evidence in a criminal case. Each transaction told a story of deception, of conversations they'd had about my money while excluding me from the decisions. They'd been planning this for years, positioning themselves to take control of my assets while maintaining the fiction that they were caring for an aging, confused father. But it was Thursday morning that delivered the final blow. I was sorting through the mail when I found an envelope addressed to Sarah at my address. My name wasn't anywhere on it, but it had been delivered to my house. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a brochure for Sunset Manor, along with a detailed pricing sheet and application forms. Someone had already filled in my personal information, my financial details, even listed my medical history as including early-stage dementia and increasing confusion about financial matters. At the bottom, in Sarah's handwriting, was a note. Dad's room should be ready by Christmas. Confirm the monthly payment setup. Monthly payment setup. They weren't just planning to put me in a nursing home. They were planning to use my own money to pay for it while they took control of everything else I'd worked for. I sat there staring at the papers until my hands stopped shaking. Then I did something I hadn't done since Margaret's death. I made a plan. Friday morning, I called my old law firm. Not Sarah's friend who'd helped with the estate planning, but the firm where I'd worked as a paralegal for 22 years before retirement. I knew they'd give me honest advice, not whatever version of the truth would be most convenient for my daughter. Robert Chenoweth had been a junior associate when I retired. Now he was a partner. He agreed to see me that afternoon, and when I laid out the situation, his expression grew darker with each detail. George, I have to tell you, this is financial elder abuse. Clear as day. Your daughter has systematically deceived financial institutions and potentially forged medical documents to gain control of your assets. Can we fix it? Absolutely. But I need to know how far you want to take this. We can simply revoke her power of attorney and reclaim control of your accounts. Or, he leaned forward, we can make sure this never happens again. What do you mean? Well, let's start with the immediate issue. We can revoke all her access to your accounts today. Change banks if necessary. Set up new accounts she knows nothing about. Then we look at the bigger picture. Robert explained that I could legally reclaim everything she'd taken, demand repayment, even pursue criminal charges if I chose. But there was another option, one that appealed to me more than the drama of a courtroom battle. I could just disappear, I said slowly. Financially, I mean. Make it impossible for them to find or access my money. Robert smiled. That's certainly within your rights. In fact, given what they've planned for you, it might be the most poetic justice. We spent the next 2 hours setting up a completely new financial structure. New bank, new accounts, new credit cards, all in my name only. Robert would be my new financial power of attorney, but only in the event of genuine incapacity verified by multiple independent doctors. My assets would be protected by a trust that Sarah couldn't access or challenge. The most satisfying part was the safety net I created for Tommy. Sarah's son had always treated me with genuine respect, never asking for money or expecting anything beyond the grandfather I'd always tried to be. The trust would ensure his college education was fully funded, with additional support available for graduate school or starting a career. Sarah and Mark would have no say in how that money was used. By Friday evening, I was no longer the confused widower they thought they were managing. I was a man with a plan, secure finances they couldn't touch, and a growing sense of anticipation for what would come next. Saturday morning, I found Sarah in my kitchen, going through my mail as if she lived there. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw a flash of something that might have been guilt, before her usual casual entitlement returned. "Morning, Dad. I was just checking to see if your insurance statements came in. You know how you get confused about those." I poured myself coffee and sat across from her, studying her face. This was my daughter, the child I'd raised, loved, supported through every crisis and celebration of her life. The woman who was now planning to warehouse me in a nursing home while she spent my money on vacations. "Find anything interesting?" I asked. "Just the usual bills. Nothing you need to worry about." She had no idea that as of yesterday afternoon, she no longer had access to pay those bills even if she wanted to. The next time she tried to use one of my cards or transfer money from my accounts, she'd discover that her financial pipeline had been permanently severed. I watched her sort through the mail with the casual confidence of someone who believed she was in complete control of the situation. Soon, very soon, she was going to learn just how wrong she was. But first, I was going to let her try to use my credit card one more time, just to see the look on her face when it was declined. The anticipation was almost unbearable. The call came on a Tuesday morning at exactly 11:47 a.m. I know the precise time because I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, when my phone rang with the frantic urgency that only comes from genuine panic. "Dad!" Sarah's voice was shrill, breathless. "Dad, something's wrong with your credit card." I set down my coffee cup slowly, savoring the moment I'd been anticipating for 3 days. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I'm at Wegmans, and your card was declined. The cashier said to call the bank that there might be a problem with the account. I have a cart full of groceries and there's a line of people behind me." The embarrassment in her voice was palpable. I could picture her standing there in the checkout line, probably dressed in one of the expensive outfits she'd bought with my money, trying to maintain her composure while the card reader flashed "declined" for everyone to see. "That's strange," I said, injecting just the right amount of confusion into my voice. "Maybe I forgot to pay the bill." "Forgot to pay the bill?" Her voice cracked. "Dad, you never handle the bills. I handle all of that for you, remember?" "Oh, right, I get confused sometimes." There was a pause, and I could hear the murmur of impatient customers behind her. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on that carefully controlled tone she used when she was trying not to lose her temper in public. "Dad, can you call the credit card company? There has to be some mistake. I need to pay for these groceries." "Of course, honey. Let me see what I can find out." I hung up and immediately called Robert Chenoweth. "It's working," I told him. "She just tried to use the card." "How do you feel?" he asked. Honestly, I felt better than I had in 2 years. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like I had some control over my own life. My phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time, Sarah's panic had evolved into something sharper, more desperate. "Dad, what did you find out?" "Well," I said, drawing out the word, "I called the bank and they said the account has been closed." "Closed? What do you mean closed?" "They said someone requested that all the accounts be closed and moved to a different bank. Something about security concerns." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to process what this meant for her carefully constructed financial arrangements. "Dad," she said finally, her voice very small, "did you close the accounts?" "Me? Honey, you know I don't understand all that banking stuff. You handle all of that for me." "But someone had to authorize it. Banks don't just close accounts for no reason." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Maybe you should call them yourself. You're much better with these things than I am." After I hung up, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. The beautiful irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. For months, Sarah had been treating me like I was too confused and incompetent to manage my own affairs. Now, when she desperately needed me to take action, she was discovering just how inconvenient my supposed incompetence could be. The next call came 2 hours later. This time, it wasn't just Sarah. "George, what the hell is going on?" Mark's voice boomed through the phone with none of his usual careful politeness. "Sarah's been on the phone with 3 different banks, and they're all telling her the same story. All your accounts have been moved." "That's what they told me too," I said mildly. "Strange, isn't it?" "Strange?" His voice rose an octave. "George, we have bills to pay. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and Sarah's been using your account to cover it since your name is on the deed. Actually, my name wasn't on their deed anymore. That had been one of the first things Robert and I had addressed. The house I'd helped them buy, the down payment I'd provided, all of it had been legally transferred back to me when we discovered they'd been using my credit to secure loans I'd never agreed to. But Mark didn't know that yet. "Well," I said, "I'm sure it will all get sorted out." "Sorted out?" Mark's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "George, this isn't some minor inconvenience. We're talking about our mortgage, our car payments, our credit cards. Everything runs through your accounts." "That seems like poor planning," I observed. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Mark spoke again, his voice low and dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. "George, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you need to fix this, today." "I'm not playing any game, Mark. I'm just a confused old man who doesn't understand banking, remember?" I hung up before he could respond. The third call came that evening. Sarah was crying. "Dad, please. I know you're upset about our conversation last Sunday, but this is going too far. We can't access any of your accounts. The credit cards aren't working. Even the account where you deposit your Social Security checks has been moved." "Maybe someone stole my identity," I suggested. "I hear that happens to older people a lot." "Dad, please stop. Just tell me which bank you moved everything to. We'll figure this out together." The desperation in her voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the automatic urge to fix whatever was wrong in my daughter's life. Then I remembered the nursing home brochures, the forged medical documents, the $40,000 they'd stolen while treating me like I was too senile to notice. "Sarah," I said gently, "I think maybe this is a sign that you and Mark need to learn to handle your own finances." "Our own finances?" She was sobbing now. "Dad, you know we can't afford the house without your help. The car payments, the credit cards, everything is based on having access to your income. That sounds like a problem you should have considered before making those commitments. Dad, please, if you don't help us, we'll lose everything." I thought about pointing out that I was losing everything too, that their plan had been to take my house, my independence, my dignity, and lock me away in an institution while they enjoyed the life my money provided. Instead, I simply said, "I'm sorry you're having financial difficulties, sweetheart. Maybe you should look into budgeting." The fourth call came at midnight. This time it was Mark, and he was drunk. "You think you're clever, don't you, old man?" His words were slurred but filled with venom. "You think you can just cut us off and what, we'll disappear? You need us, George. Who's going to take care of you when you start losing your mind for real?" I seem to be managing fine on my own. For now. But what happens when you fall down those stairs? What happens when you forget to take your medication or leave the stove on? You think you can live in that big house forever, but you can't. You're going to need help, and when you do, we're going to remember this conversation. The threat was clear, and it confirmed everything I'd suspected about their motivations. They'd never been concerned about my welfare. They'd been concerned about maintaining control over my assets. "Mark," I said calmly, "I think you've been drinking. You should probably get some sleep. Don't you dare hang up on me, you senile." I hung up. Wednesday morning brought a new development. Sarah showed up at my house at 7 a.m., still in her pajamas, her hair uncombed, her face red and swollen from crying. "Dad," she said the moment I opened the door, "we need to talk." I made coffee while she sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd discussed putting me in a nursing home just 10 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Dad, I know you're angry about what we said last Sunday. I know we handled it wrong, but you have to understand, we were just worried about you. This house is so big, and since Mom died, you've seemed so lost." "I have seemed lost," I agreed. But I'm feeling much clearer now. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Then you'll fix this? You'll call the bank and get our access restored? I sat down across from her, studying her face. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose tears I'd dried 1,000 times. But looking at her now, all I could see was a stranger who had systematically deceived me for 2 years. Sarah, I said quietly, do you remember what you said to me last Sunday? She shifted uncomfortably. We were just trying to help. You said it would be better for everyone if I moved to a nursing home. Do you remember that? Dad, we didn't mean... You laughed when Mark called me a stubborn old man. You agreed when he said I didn't know when to get out of the way. Her face crumpled. We were just frustrated. Taking care of you is hard, and we're under so much pressure with the house and Mark's job and... Taking care of me? I interrupted. Sarah, when exactly have you taken care of me? She blinked, confusion replacing the tears. We come over every Sunday. We handle your finances. We make sure you're eating properly. You come over every Sunday to eat the dinner I cook. You handle my finances by spending my money on yourselves. And the only time you've shown concern about my eating is when you're calculating how much of my grocery budget you can redirect to your own needs. The truth hung between us like a physical presence. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again, perhaps finally understanding that her lies had caught up with her. What do you want from us? She whispered. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had planned to warehouse me in a nursing home while she enjoyed the fruits of my lifetime of work, and I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete indifference to her suffering. I want you to leave, I said simply, and I want you to figure out how to pay your own bills. She stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Dad, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. That's when she began to cry in earnest, not the manipulative tears she'd used for years to get her way, but the desperate sobs of someone who had just realized that their safety net had disappeared. But I didn't comfort her. For the first time in her 36 years, I let my daughter cry without rushing to fix whatever was wrong. It felt like freedom. They came back together on Friday evening, and this time they didn't knock. I was in my living room, reading a book about home renovation that I'd picked up at the library, when I heard Sarah's key in the front door, the key I'd forgotten she still had. The sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floor was followed by Mark's heavier footsteps, and I knew immediately that this wasn't going to be another tearful plea for understanding. Dad? Sarah's voice had a new quality to it, something harder than the desperation I'd heard all week. We need to talk. I set down my book and looked up to find them standing in my living room like a hostile delegation. Sarah was dressed in her best business suit, the navy one she wore to important meetings. Mark had traded his usual casual clothes for a dark shirt and slacks. They looked like they were attending a funeral, which, in a way, they were. Hello, Sarah. Mark. I gestured to the chairs across from me. Please sit down. Mark remained standing, his arms crossed, his jaw set in the stubborn line I'd learned to recognize as his fighting stance. Sarah perched on the edge of the sofa, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap with the precision of someone trying very hard to maintain control. Dad, she began, her voice steady but cold, we've spent the week trying to understand what happened to your accounts. We've called every bank in the area, spoken to financial advisors, even consulted with a lawyer. That must have been exhausting, I said mildly. Mark stepped forward. Cut the act, George. We know you moved the money deliberately. We know you've been planning this. I raised an eyebrow. Planning what? This? Sarah gestured around the room as if it were evidence of some elaborate crime. This whole performance. Pretending to be confused, acting like you don't understand what's happening. You've been manipulating us. The accusation hung in the air between us. For a moment I felt a strange urge to laugh. After 2 years of them manipulating me, they were now upset that I had finally learned to play their game. I see, I said. And what exactly do you think I've been manipulating you into? Mark's composure cracked. You know damn well what. You've cut off our access to your money as some kind of revenge for suggesting you move to a retirement community. A retirement community, I repeated. Is that what we're calling nursing homes now? Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. Dad, Sunset Manor is a very nice facility. We weren't trying to get rid of you. No? I stood up and walked to the bookshelf where I'd placed the brochures I'd found in my mail. Then perhaps you can explain these. I handed her the Sunset Manor materials, watching her face as she recognized her own handwriting on the application forms. The color drained from her cheeks as she read the medical information she'd fabricated, the financial details she'd filled in without my knowledge, the note about confirming monthly payment arrangements. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "They were mailed to my house, in your name, with my personal information already filled in, including a diagnosis of early-stage dementia that I was never aware I'd received." Mark snatched the papers from Sarah's hands, his face darkening as he read. "These don't mean anything. We were just exploring options. Options that included lying about my mental state to secure admission to a facility I never agreed to consider?" "We weren't lying," Sarah protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "You have been confused lately, forgetful. Since Mom died, you've been different." "Different how?" "You forget conversations we've had. You repeat yourself. Sometimes you seem lost in your own house." I stared at my daughter, amazed by her ability to rewrite history to justify her actions. "Sarah, I have never been confused about anything except why my own family was treating me like a burden to be managed." Mark stepped between us, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous, George. You're 60 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you, with no real purpose or structure to your life. We were trying to help. By stealing my money?" The words hit the room like a slap. Sarah gasped, Mark's eyes widened, and for a moment no one spoke. "We didn't steal anything," Sarah said finally, her voice shaking. "You gave me power of attorney. You asked me to handle your finances. I gave you power of attorney to help me during the worst period of my grief, when I could barely function. I didn't give you permission to treat my bank account like your personal ATM." I walked back to the bookshelf and pulled out the folder Robert had prepared for me. It contained copies of every transaction, every transfer, every fraudulent charge from the past 2 years. I handed it to Sarah and watched her face as she flipped through the evidence of her systematic theft. $43,000, I said quietly. "That's how much you've taken from my accounts over the past 2 years. Your kitchen renovation, Mark's golf membership, your vacation to Europe, the down payment on your BMW. All of it funded by money you took from a grieving widower who trusted you." Sarah's hands were shaking as she read. "Dad, those weren't personal expenses. Those were family expenses. We're your family." "Family," I repeated. "Is that what you call people who plan to warehouse their father in a nursing home while they spend his life savings?" Mark grabbed the folder from Sarah, scanning the documents with growing alarm. "These numbers are wrong. We didn't take this much. Every transaction is documented," I said. "Every lie you told the bank, every forged authorization, every transfer you made while telling them I was too confused to manage my own affairs." The evidence was overwhelming, and they both knew it. Sarah sank back onto the sofa, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. Mark continued reading, his face growing paler with each page. "We can pay it back," Sarah said suddenly. "If you're upset about the money, we can work out a payment plan." "With what?" I asked. "Your mortgage payment is 3 weeks overdue. Your credit cards are maxed out. According to the bank records, you haven't made a payment from your own account in over a year." Mark slammed the folder down on the coffee table. "That's because we've been taking care of you. Do you think it's free to drive over here every week? To handle your finances? To worry about your health and safety?" "Taking care of me," I said slowly. "Mark, in the 2 years since Margaret died, how many times have you asked how I was feeling?" He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "How many times have you helped with yard work or house maintenance, or even offered to fix something that was broken? How many times have you invited me to your house for dinner, or included me in your vacation plans, or treated me like anything more than a source of funding for your lifestyle?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought you were happy with the arrangement." "Happy?" I looked at my daughter, this woman who had once been the light of my life, and felt nothing but profound sadness. "Sarah, you thought I was happy being treated like a confused old man whose only value was his bank account. That's not how we saw you. It's exactly how you saw me. And when my usefulness as a financial resource started to interfere with your long-term plans, you decided to put me somewhere I couldn't cause problems." Mark's anger flared again. "Fine. You want to know the truth? Yes, we were planning to move you to Sunset Manor. Yes, we've been using your money to maintain our lifestyle. But you know what, George? You owe us." "I owe you?" "Damn right you owe us. Sarah spent her childhood taking care of her sick mother while you worked all the time. She sacrificed her college years to stay home and help with Margaret's cancer treatments. She gave up opportunities, relationships, her whole life to be the perfect daughter. And what did she get for it? A father who barely notices she exists unless he needs something. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had been sick during Sarah's teenage years, battling breast cancer through grueling rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. I had worked long hours to pay for her treatment, often leaving Sarah to handle responsibilities no teenager should have to bear. "You're right," I said quietly. "I did work too much during those years. I did leave Sarah with more responsibility than she should have had." Mark smiled triumphantly, thinking he'd won the argument. "But," I continued, "that doesn't give either of you the right to steal from me now. It doesn't justify lying to banks, forging medical documents, or planning to commit me to a nursing home against my will." Sarah was crying again. But these weren't the manipulative tears I'd grown accustomed to. These were the desperate sobs of someone who had just watched their carefully constructed world collapse. "Dad, what do you want from us? We're sorry. We made mistakes, but we're your family. You can't just cut us off completely." I looked at my daughter, at this woman who had systematically betrayed my trust while claiming to care for my welfare, and I felt the last vestiges of my parental instinct die. "Sarah," I said gently, "I spent 36 years being your father. I clothed you, fed you, paid for your education, walked you down the aisle at your wedding, helped you buy your house, and supported you through every crisis in your adult life. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my daughter and became someone who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. That's not true. It is true. And the proof is sitting right there in that folder. 2 years of evidence that you and Mark have been planning my life around your financial needs, not my well-being." Mark stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "So what happens now? You're just going to abandon your own family?" I looked at him steadily. "Mark, you abandoned me the moment you decided I was too old and inconvenient to deserve respect. You abandoned me when you started planning to put me in a nursing home without asking my opinion. You abandoned me when you decided my money belonged to you. We never said your money belonged to us. You acted like it did. Every credit card charge, every bank transfer, every decision you made about my finances without consulting me. You treated my savings like a family resource, and when I became inconvenient, you planned to warehouse me somewhere you wouldn't have to deal with me anymore." The room fell silent. Sarah had stopped crying and was staring at me with something that might have been recognition, as if she was finally seeing the man she'd been systematically betraying for 2 years. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I walked to the front door and opened it, the cool evening air flowing into the house. "Now," I said, "you leave. You figure out how to pay your own bills, maintain your own lives, and solve your own problems. You learn what it means to be independent adults instead of parasites feeding off your father's grief." They stood there for a moment, clearly expecting me to soften, to offer some compromise that would allow them to maintain their lifestyle while saving face. When I didn't move from the door, Mark grabbed Sarah's arm. "Come on," he said. "He'll change his mind when he realizes he needs us." But as they walked past me, I spoke one more time. "Sarah, leave your key on the table." She turned, her eyes wide with shock. "Dad, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Slowly, she reached into her purse and placed the house key on the table by the door. As they walked down the front steps, I heard Mark mutter something about "stubborn old fool," and Sarah's response that I'd regret this. I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt for the first time in 2 years. Standing in my living room, surrounded by the silence of my own home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Margaret's death. Peace. The weeks that followed were quieter than any I'd experienced since Margaret's death. But it wasn't the hollow silence of grief. This was the peaceful quiet of a man who had finally taken control of his own life. I established new routines: morning coffee on the back porch, reading the newspaper cover to cover instead of skimming headlines, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, actually noticing the gardens I'd passed by for years without seeing, evening phone calls with Tommy, Sarah's son, who had started calling me regularly since I'd reached out to him directly. Those conversations with my grandson became the highlight of my days. Tommy was 19 now, studying automotive technology at the community college and working part-time at a local garage. He had his mother's intelligence, but none of her entitlement. And when I told him about the trust fund I'd established for his education, his reaction was everything Sarah's hadn't been. "Grandpa, are you sure?" he'd asked, his voice thick with emotion. "That's a lot of money. I don't want you to do anything you can't afford." The contrast with his mother's assumption that my money was hers by right couldn't have been starker. It was during one of our calls, about 3 weeks after I'd cut off Sarah and Mark, that Tommy first mentioned the problems at his mother's house. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" His voice was hesitant, careful. "Mom and Mark have been acting really strange lately. They keep having these intense conversations that stop when I walk into the room, and Mom's been crying a lot." I felt a familiar pang of concern, the automatic response of a parent to their child's distress, followed immediately by the reminder that Sarah had forfeited her right to my sympathy. "What kind of strange behavior?" I asked. "Well, they've been fighting about money constantly. Mark keeps saying they need to find a solution, and Mom keeps saying she's working on it. Yesterday, I heard them talking about selling the house. Selling the house I'd helped them buy, whose down payment had come from my savings account, whose mortgage payments had been coming from my retirement funds for the past 2 years. Robert had warned me this might happen when I'd reclaimed the property deed. Are you okay there, Tommy? Do you feel safe?" "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just weird. They used to act like they had everything figured out, and now they seem desperate about something. Mom asked me if I had any money saved up from my job. When I told her I was saving for a car, she got this look on her face like she wanted to ask me for it, but couldn't bring herself to do it. That evening, I called Robert to discuss the situation. As my attorney and the trustee of Tommy's education fund, he'd been monitoring the legal ramifications of cutting off Sarah's access to my finances. "They're in free fall," he told me bluntly. 3 mortgage payments behind, maxed out on every credit card, and Mark's car was repossessed yesterday. Sarah's been calling every financial institution in the area, trying to get emergency loans. But without your income as collateral, no one will touch them. What about their own income? George, they haven't been living on their own income for 2 years. Between Mark's salary and Sarah's part-time bookkeeping work, they bring in maybe $4,000 a month. Their mortgage alone is $2,800, plus car payments, credit cards, the country club membership, all the lifestyle expenses they've been charging to your accounts. They've been spending almost twice what they earn." The numbers were sobering. I'd known they were financially irresponsible, but I hadn't realized how completely they'd built their lives around my money. "How long can they maintain this?" "Not long. I'd guess another month, maybe 2, before they lose the house." "Sarah's been trying to contact you through intermediaries, by the way. She called my office yesterday claiming there was a family emergency." "What did you tell her?" "That you were unavailable and that all communication should go through official channels." 2 days later, the intermediary arrived in the form of Margaret's sister, Helen, who showed up at my door with the kind of grim determination that suggested she'd been sent on a mission. Helen had always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone talking. She was also someone I genuinely respected, which made her presence at my door particularly troubling. "George," she said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." I invited her in and made tea, the same Earl Grey that Margaret had always served when Helen visited. She accepted the cup with a sad smile that told me she remembered too. "Sarah called me," she said without preamble. "She's very upset about this situation with you two." "I imagine she is." Helen studied my face with the careful attention of someone trying to read between the lines. "She says you've cut off all financial support and won't speak to her. She's worried about you, George. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Helen, did Sarah explain why I cut off her access to my accounts?" "She said there was a misunderstanding about some nursing home brochures and that you overreacted." "A misunderstanding." I got up and retrieved the folder of bank statements and forged documents. "Take a look at this and tell me if you think it's a misunderstanding." Helen spent the next 30 minutes reviewing the evidence of Sarah's systematic theft. Her expression grew more troubled with each page, and when she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with the kind of disappointment that comes from having your faith in someone shattered. "George, I had no idea it was this extensive. Sarah didn't mention the $43,000 she's taken from my accounts over the past 2 years. She said you'd been helping them with some expenses, but she made it sound like you'd offered." "Did she mention the forged medical documents claiming I have dementia?" Helen's face went pale. "No, she definitely didn't mention that." I showed her the nursing home applications with my personal information filled in without my knowledge, the note about monthly payment arrangements, the complete plan to warehouse me in an institution while they enjoyed my money. "Helen, they weren't planning to help me transition to a retirement community. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take legal control of all my assets." She set down the papers with shaking hands. George, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Sarah is very good at presenting her version of events in a way that makes her look like the victim. Helen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across my coffee table. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. What can I do to help? Nothing. This is something Sarah and Mark need to figure out on their own. But they're going to lose their house. Yes, they probably are. George, whatever they've done, they're still family, and Tommy's caught in the middle of this. That gave me pause. Tommy was innocent in all of this, a good kid who didn't deserve to suffer because of his mother's greed and poor judgment. Tommy's education is completely secured, I told her. He has a full scholarship fund that Sarah and Mark can't touch, no matter what happens to them. He'll be fine. What about Sarah? I looked at Helen, this woman who had been like a second mother to Sarah growing up, and I tried to find some compassion for my daughter. But every time I thought about forgiving her, I remembered the nursing home brochures, the forged medical documents, the casual way she'd laughed when Mark called me a burden. Helen, for 2 years, Sarah has been stealing from me while planning to put me in a nursing home. She's lied to banks, forged medical documents, and systematically dismantled my independence. At what point does family loyalty become enabling? Helen didn't have an answer for that. After she left, I sat in my living room thinking about the conversation. Part of me felt guilty for dragging Helen into this mess, for forcing her to see the evidence of Sarah's betrayal. But a larger part of me felt relieved that someone else finally understood what I'd been dealing with. The next morning brought a new development. Tommy called, his voice shaky with worry. Grandpa, something's happening here. Mom and Mark have been packing boxes all morning, and there's a man in a suit taking pictures of the house. Where are you now? At work. But I'm supposed to go home for lunch, and I'm scared of what I'm going to find. Tommy, listen to me carefully. Do you have somewhere else you can stay for a while? I guess I could stay with Dad, but Mom would freak out if I left now. Your safety and well-being are more important than your mother's feelings. If you feel uncomfortable in that house, you go to your father's. Understand? Yeah, okay. Grandpa, are Mom and Mark in trouble? They're dealing with the consequences of some very poor decisions. But you're not responsible for fixing their problems. That afternoon, Helen called to tell me that Sarah and Mark had been served with foreclosure papers. They had 30 days to bring their mortgage current or lose the house. Sarah's desperate, George. She's talking about borrowing money from anyone who will listen. She even asked me for $20,000. Did you give it to her? No. After seeing those documents you showed me, I told her she needed to face the reality of her situation. 3 days later, Sarah herself called. I almost didn't answer, but something in the way the phone rang, insistent and desperate, made me pick up. Dad, she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. I need to ask you for something, and I know I don't have the right. What is it, Sarah? We're going to lose the house. The bank wants the full amount of the missed payments plus penalties, and we don't have it. I'm not asking you to pay our mortgage or give us money for our lifestyle. I'm asking you to help us avoid homelessness. The plea was different from her usual demands. There was no entitlement, no assumption that I owed her anything, just desperate honesty. How much do you need? $12,000 to bring the mortgage current. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who had raised me after my parents died, who had bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with homework and celebrated every achievement in my life. Then I thought about the woman who had planned to put me in a nursing home while stealing my money. Sarah, I said finally, 2 months ago you were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could take control of my assets. You forged medical documents and lied to financial institutions. You spent $43,000 of my money without my permission. Now you want me to give you $12,000 more so you can keep the house you were going to take away from me? Dad, please. I know we made mistakes. Mistakes? My voice was harsher than I'd intended. Sarah, you didn't make mistakes. You made deliberate choices to deceive and steal from your own father. She was crying now, the desperate sobs of someone who had finally run out of options. What do you want me to do? How do I make this right? You can't make it right, Sarah. Some things can't be undone. So you're just going to let us lose everything? I thought about that question for a long moment. Was I letting them lose everything, or was I simply refusing to enable their irresponsible behavior any longer? Sarah, you lost everything the moment you decided to treat me like a confused old man whose only value was his bank account. I'm not taking anything away from you. I'm just refusing to continue funding a lifestyle you can't afford. The line was quiet, except for her crying. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, sweetheart. But sorry doesn't give me back the 2 years of my life you stole, or the trust you betrayed, or the dignity you took away from me. After I hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories. Somewhere along the way, that little girl had become a woman who saw her own father as nothing more than a source of money. The tragedy wasn't that Sarah and Mark were losing their house. The tragedy was that they had destroyed their family for a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and now they were facing the consequences of those choices. I felt sad for them, but I didn't feel guilty. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 6 months later, I was standing in the garden of my new home, a modest 2-bedroom cottage just 3 miles from Tommy's college, watching my grandson help me plant tomatoes in the raised beds we'd built together the previous weekend. The cottage was everything my old house hadn't been: manageable, comfortable, and filled with the kind of peace that comes from knowing every corner belongs to you completely. No one had keys they shouldn't have. No one was planning my future without consulting me. No one was treating my bank account like their personal fund. Grandpa, are you sure these tomato plants are going to make it? Tommy asked, brushing dirt from his hands. They look kind of small. Give them time, I said, watching him work with the same careful attention to detail that had made him such a good student. Sometimes the strongest things start out looking fragile. It had been Tommy's idea for me to move closer to his college. After the foreclosure, after his mother and Mark had separated, after the dust had settled on the wreckage of their financial collapse, he'd been the one to suggest that maybe I didn't need to live alone in a house too big for one person. Not because you can't handle it, he'd been careful to clarify, but because maybe you might enjoy having family nearby who actually appreciate you. The house sale had gone smoothly. Robert had handled all the legal details, ensuring that the proceeds were safely deposited in accounts only I could access. Sarah had made one last attempt to claim part of the sale money, arguing that she'd contributed to the home's value through the improvements she'd made with my credit cards. Robert had responded with a detailed letter outlining her theft, fraud, and attempted elder abuse. She hadn't contacted us again. Tommy finished planting the last tomato and sat back on his heels, surveying our work. Mom called me yesterday, he said quietly. This was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah in weeks. After the foreclosure, she'd moved into a small apartment across town and taken a full-time job at an accounting firm. Mark had moved back in with his parents, and their divorce was proceeding as amicably as any divorce can when both parties are broke. How is she? I asked, because despite everything, she was still my daughter. Struggling, but maybe in a good way. Tommy frowned, trying to find the right words. She's working a lot, taking responsibility for her bills. She asked me to tell you that she's been going to counseling. That's good to hear. She also wanted me to tell you that she understands why you can't forgive her and that she's not asking you to. She just wanted you to know that she finally gets it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Forgiveness wasn't something I'd thought much about in recent months. I'd been too busy rediscovering who I was when I wasn't being manipulated and stolen from. Do you miss her? Tommy asked. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Did I miss the daughter who had laughed at Mark's jokes about putting me in a nursing home? Did I miss the woman who had forged medical documents to have me declared incompetent? Did I miss being treated like a confused old man whose only value was his bank account? I miss who I thought she was, I said finally. I miss the daughter I believed I had. But that person might not have existed for a long time. Tommy was quiet for a moment, pulling weeds from between the plants. She told me once that she never thought you'd actually cut her off. She said she was sure you'd give in eventually because parents always forgive their kids. What do you think about that? He looked up at me with serious eyes. I think some things are unforgivable, and I think maybe that's okay. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. 2 generations of men who had learned that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Later that afternoon, as Tommy was getting ready to head back to his dorm, he paused at the front door with the kind of hesitation that suggested he had something important to say. Grandpa, can I tell you something? Of course. I'm proud of you, for standing up for yourself, for not letting them treat you like that anymore. He paused, searching for the right words. I know it wasn't easy to cut off Mom, but watching what you did taught me something important about self-respect. After he left, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood come alive with the sounds of evening. Children playing in yards, families gathering for dinner, couples walking their dogs. Normal life, the kind I'd forgotten existed during those 2 years of manipulation and theft. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see Helen's name on the caller ID. We'd spoken occasionally since the day I'd shown her the evidence of Sarah's betrayal, but always briefly, carefully. George, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. How are you, Helen? I'm well. I'm calling because I wanted you to know that I saw Sarah last week. She asked me to give you a message if you're willing to hear it. I hesitated. 6 months ago, I would have said no immediately, but something about the peace I'd found in my new life made me feel secure enough to listen. What did she want to say? She wanted you to know that she's paying back the money. Not to you directly because she knows you don't want contact with her, but to a charity that helps elderly people who've been financially abused. She's been making monthly payments from her salary. The gesture surprised me, not because it erased what she'd done, but because it suggested she might finally understand the gravity of her actions. She also wanted you to know that she's grateful you secured Tommy's education. She said she realizes now that you were protecting him from her poor judgment. Is she doing okay? Really? Helen was quiet for a moment. She's learning to live within her means for the first time in her adult life. It's been hard for her, but I think it's been necessary. She's taking responsibility for her choices in a way she never has before. After we hung up, I thought about that conversation for a long time. Sarah was paying back the money she'd stolen, not to me, but to help other elderly people who had been victimized by their own families. It was a form of justice I hadn't expected, and one that felt more meaningful than any personal apology could have been. That evening, I called Robert to discuss something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I want to change my will, I told him. Any particular reason? I want to establish a foundation, something that helps elderly people who are being financially abused by family members. I want it funded well enough to provide legal assistance, financial counseling, and support for people who need to escape these situations. Robert was quiet for a moment. That's a significant undertaking, George. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. I had the resources and knowledge to fight back when my family tried to exploit me. Most people in my situation don't have those advantages. What about Tommy's inheritance? Tommy's education and early career support are already fully funded. This would be in addition to that, not instead of it. We spent the next hour discussing the legal framework for what would become the Margaret Henderson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection, named after my late wife, who had always believed that family should be a source of support, not exploitation. A year later, I stood in the foundation's first office, a small but efficient space staffed by 2 attorneys, a financial counselor, and a victim advocate. In our first 12 months of operation, we'd helped 37 elderly people escape financial abuse, recovered over $200,000 in stolen assets, and provided legal representation to families who couldn't afford to fight back against their exploitative children. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah's theft had led to something that would help countless other families avoid the same betrayal. Her monthly payments to the foundation continued steadily, and while we'd never spoken directly about it, I knew she understood that this was her path to redemption, not through my forgiveness, but through helping others who had suffered what I'd suffered. Tommy graduated from college that spring with honors and a job offer from a prestigious automotive engineering firm. At his graduation party, held in my cottage's backyard, he gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. I want to thank my grandfather, he said, looking directly at me, for showing me what integrity looks like, for teaching me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's bad behavior, and for proving that it's never too late to start over and build something meaningful. As I looked around at the small gathering of friends Tommy had made, neighbors I'd come to know, and colleagues from the foundation, I realized something profound. I had found my family. Not the family I was born into or married into, but the family I had chosen, made up of people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the stars, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. The humiliation of being planned for like a piece of furniture, the betrayal of discovering my daughter's systematic theft, the loneliness of cutting ties with people I'd loved my entire life. But I also thought about the strength I'd discovered in myself, the peace that came from living authentically, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful from the wreckage of my old life. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Thanks for an amazing graduation party, Grandpa. I'm proud to be your grandson." I smiled, typed back, "I'm proud to be your grandfather," and meant every word. The past couldn't be changed. Sarah would always be the daughter who had tried to steal my independence and dignity. Mark would always be the son-in-law who had mocked my age while planning to warehouse me in a nursing home. But the future was mine to write, and I was writing it surrounded by people who saw me as George the Foundation founder, George the mentor, George the friend, George the grandfather, who had taught his grandson that self-respect was worth more than family peace. As I turned off the porch light and headed inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment with my choices. I had lost a family, but I had gained myself. And for the first time since Margaret's death, that felt like enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.